Do you remember yourself at 15? Chances are it was intense. Something was happening with your body, something with your head, something with your relationships. Your parents suddenly stopped seeming like people who knew everything and started seeming like people who understood nothing. What your friends thought mattered more than what your family thought. Risk felt magnetic. The group defined everything. Most adults look back on adolescence as a period they simply had to survive. Parents raising teenagers right now often feel the same way. Just hold on until they're 20. But here's a question evolutionary neuroscience is asking. What if all that chaos isn't an accident or a flaw? What if the pull toward risk, the obsession with peer approval, the conflict with parents, the urge to push past every limit, what if those aren't bugs in the program, but the program itself? And the second question, how did people handle this 30,000 years ago?
The teenage brain isn't a broken adult brain, it's a purpose-built instrument. Let's start with neuroscience, because understanding how prehistoric people dealt with teenagers is impossible without understanding what's actually happening in the brain during this period. For a long time, scientists believed the brain finished developing around age 12. That turned out to be wrong. Sarah-Jayne Blakemore, professor of psychology and cognitive neuroscience at the University of Cambridge, has spent decades studying the adolescent brain using MRI. Her breakthrough finding? The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and self-awareness, continues actively developing well into the mid-20s, sometimes later. This means that at 15, a person has an almost fully formed limbic system, the center of emotion, reward, and social sensitivity, but doesn't yet have a fully operational braking system in the form of the prefrontal cortex. The limbic system matures earlier, the prefrontal cortex later. This mismatch in developmental timing is the neurobiological foundation of adolescent behavior. What does this mean in practice? Teenagers feel rewards more intensely than adults do. Risk registers as exciting, not threatening. Peer approval activates reward centers more powerfully than it does in adults. Social rejection, on the other hand, causes disproportionately intense pain. Blakemore's research showed that teenagers take risks not because they fail to understand danger. In calm conditions, they assess risk just as rationally as adults. The problem emerges in the presence of peers. When the social context activates, the limbic system overrides rational analysis. One of her examples? Young drivers have significantly more accidents when other young people are in the car. Not because they drive worse, because the social context changes the neurological calculation.
Teenagers don't take risks because they're stupid. They take risks because that's how their brain is built. But why is the brain built this way? What was evolution thinking when it created this dangerous period? Blakemore offers a direct evolutionary answer. There's probably a very good reason why adolescents care so much about being accepted into a social group and take more risks when their friends are around. It makes sense if you think about the need to become independent from your parents, go out and explore the world, and form bonds with your social group. Adolescence is an evolutionarily programmed period of separation from parents and integration into the peer group. It's not a pathology, it's an adaptation. In the Pleistocene, this was precisely the age when a young person began forming their own alliances, outside the family. This was the age when they had to step out of their parents' shadow and claim their place in the adult hierarchy. This was the age when the search for a mate began, which means peer status was literally a question of reproductive success. Evolutionary anthropologists put it directly. In prehistoric times, adolescence was the moment when young people entered the adult world. They participated in hunts, took on responsibilities inside and outside the home, formed partnerships. So evolution could have programmed the human species with fundamental drives for affiliation and status precisely during this period, the time when those things first mattered for survival. A brain that makes peer approval the most powerful drug at this moment is a brain optimized for survival in specific conditions. The need for peer approval at 15 isn't weakness, it's an evolutionary program. Now, the main question. What did prehistoric people actually do with all of this? The first and most important difference from the modern world, prehistoric society had an answer to a question we don't have.
In the modern world, adolescence is a blurry, undefined time. You're not a child anymore, but you're not quite an adult either. You can't vote, can't drink, can't sign contracts, but you're already supposed to make serious decisions about your future. The line between childhood and adulthood is legally clear, but socially and psychologically completely blurred. When did you become an adult? Nobody really knows. In prehistoric society, this problem didn't exist because there was a ritual. Arnold van Gennep, a French ethnographer, described in his 1909 work, The Rites of Passage, a universal three-part structure found in transition rituals across all known societies. 3 phases. The first, separation. The adolescent is symbolically or physically removed from their former status as a child. They leave the familiar world. They stop being who they were. The second, liminality, the threshold state. The adolescent is between, neither child nor adult. This is a period of trial, learning, transformation. Limen in Latin means threshold. They are standing on the threshold. The third, incorporation. The adolescent is received into the adult world with a new status, new rights, and new responsibilities. This isn't just a ritual, it's a neuropsychological technology for managing transition. In prehistoric society, there was a clear answer to the question, when did you become an adult? And everyone knew that answer. Let's look at what this actually looked like. Among Aboriginal Australians, young men went through a ritual known as entering manhood. It looked different across different peoples, but the common features are remarkably consistent. The adolescent was physically separated from his mother and the world of childhood. He went through a period of trials, sometimes physically painful ones. He received secret knowledge inaccessible to children, and he returned to the community as a different person, an adult. Among the Tiwi of Northern Australia, this transition began at 14 and continued in stages until 24. It wasn't a single moment, it was an entire process of gradual incorporation into the adult world. Among the peoples of North America, the Apache, Navajo, Tlingit, similar structures existed for girls. The first menstruation became the occasion for a ritual, after which the girl was received into the world of adult women with corresponding rights and responsibilities. Among hunter-gatherers in the Amazon, Africa, and the Arctic, everywhere anthropologists find the same thing. Puberty is marked by a ritual transition that changes a person's social status irreversibly and publicly. The rite of passage solved a problem we still haven't solved. Where is the line between childhood and adulthood? What did the ritual provide neurobiologically, meaning from the perspective of what's happening in the adolescent brain? Several things. First, a clear boundary. A brain in a transitional state needs an anchor, an event that says before and after are different. The ritual created that anchor. Before, you're a child. After, you're an adult. Neuroscience tells us that clear transitions reduce the anxiety generated by status uncertainty. Second, social recognition. The adolescent brain, for which peer approval is literally a drug, received the most powerful public confirmation of new status possible. The entire community acknowledged the transition. This wasn't a private matter, it was a public act. Third, knowledge transfer. During the liminal period, when the adolescent was between statuses, they learned intensively. They received what can't be passed to a child: adult secrets, hunting techniques, survival skills, social obligations. The brain in a transitional state is especially plastic and receptive. Fourth, pain as a marker. Many initiations included an element of physical ordeal: pain, fasting, isolation. This isn't sadism. It's a neurobiological technology for memory consolidation. Intense emotional experiences are encoded differently than neutral ones. The moment of transition needed to be unforgettable. And it was.
But there's something else that rarely gets discussed. In prehistoric society, the adolescent didn't navigate the transition alone, and the parents didn't manage it. It happened with the participation of the entire community. The father or mother weren't the central figures in their child's initiation. The central figures were the elders, the shaman, the adult men or women of the group. The parent essentially released the adolescent, and it was a new status within the group that received them. This matters enormously. The conflict between an adolescent and their parents, biologically programmed, inevitable, was structurally cushioned in prehistoric society. Because at the critical moment between the adolescent and the adult world, it wasn't just the family standing there.
It was the entire community. Initiation wasn't conducted by the family. It was conducted by the whole community. Now let's look at what happened between rituals in everyday life. In hunter-gatherer societies, teenagers didn't sit apart in a separate youth group. They were integrated into adult life from a very young age. From around age 8 or 10, boys began joining hunts, not as full hunters, but as observers and helpers. They got real practice, not simulated practice. Girls the same age actively participated in gathering, childcare, food preparation. Their knowledge wasn't abstract. It was embedded in real tasks. This is fundamentally different from the modern model, where teenagers spend years in school, separated from real adult activity, acquiring knowledge in a simulated environment, with no real responsibility and no real consequences. In prehistoric society, a teenager from age 12 or 13 carried real tasks. Their contribution was real. Their mistakes had real consequences. And this, according to a number of anthropologists, is precisely why the adolescent crisis, as we understand it today, was considerably less acute. In the Stone Age, teenagers had what modern ones lack: real responsibility. Was there parent-teen conflict in prehistoric society? Yes. Biology hasn't changed. The limbic system matures before the prefrontal cortex, regardless of culture or era. The drive for independence, for peers, for risk, this is a species characteristic of Homo sapiens, not a product of modernity. But the form of the conflict was different. First, the conflict took place in a small group of 20 to 30 people, where everyone knew everyone. In a group like that, unmanaged intergenerational conflict tore apart the very fabric of survival. So the group actively intervened to resolve it. Second, the conflict had a clear resolution. The initiation ritual literally switched the status. After the ritual, you're no longer a, quote, rebellious child. You're a young adult with real obligations. The subject of the conflict changed. Third, a teenager's pull toward peers in prehistoric society didn't lead them into, quote-unquote, bad company in the city. It was channeled into a structured environment, a peer group under constant adult supervision, in real activity, in the group's ritual processes. Blakemore has pointed out that schools often start too early for many teenagers, referring to the biological shift in the sleep cycle during puberty. But that's just one symptom of a broader mismatch. Biologically, adolescence is optimized for integration into the adult world through real experience. We replaced real experience with simulated experience. We eliminated the rite of passage. We blurred the line between child and adult. And then we wonder why teenagers are struggling. We eliminated the rite of passage and replaced it with nothing. So, how did prehistoric people deal with teenagers? They didn't deal with them in the modern sense. They didn't endure them or control them. They built a system. The system had several elements. The first, early integration into real adult activity. Not simulation, not education disconnected from life, but real contribution with real consequences. The second, a clear ritual transition marking the end of childhood and the beginning of adulthood. Public, socially recognized, irreversible. The third, community, not just parental, accompaniment of the transition. The entire community participated in receiving the new adult. The fourth, structured space for the pull toward peers. Initiation was often group-based.
several teenagers the same age going through it together. They got a social group and belonging, but in the structured adult environment.
None of these elements assumed the teenage brain was a problem to be fixed. It was a resource to be used correctly. And now a question for you, one I genuinely want you to leave in the comments. Think back to your own adolescence. Was there a moment, an event, an experience, a person that clearly divided your life into before and after? A moment after which you felt like a different person? Or, if that moment never happened, how did you know you'd become an adult? Or are you still not entirely sure? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. Because that experience, having a clear line or not having one, seems to shape something very fundamental in how a person understands themselves. Let's go deeper on a few things that deserve their own look. First, sleep. Blakemore points to a key neurobiological fact. During puberty, a teenager's biological clock shifts. Melatonin starts producing later in the evening and later in the morning.
Teenagers are biologically programmed to fall asleep late and wake up late. In prehistoric society, this wasn't a problem. There was no 7 a.m. school bus. Life followed the sun, not a schedule. Modern school created a perfect mismatch, a biologically delayed sleep rhythm colliding with a social demand for early rising. This isn't laziness, it's chronobiology. Second, identity. Blakemore calls adolescence a critical period for identity formation. The brain is especially plastic to social influences right now. This is when the core patterns of self-perception get laid down, how a person sees themselves in relation to others. In prehistoric society, this process was structured. The teenager received a clear social role, a place in the hierarchy, concrete obligations and rights. Identity wasn't built in a vacuum. It was built in a specific environment with specific reference points.
In the modern world, teenagers form their identity amid unprecedented uncertainty and, simultaneously, unprecedented choice. Too many options, no clear social anchors. In the Stone Age, teenagers had a clear social role. Modern teenagers build identity in a vacuum. Third, and the most provocative one, if adolescent crisis is sharper in the modern world than it was in pre-agricultural societies, does that mean we did something wrong? Not necessarily. The modern world is incomparably more complex. Hunter-gatherer society offered teenagers a comprehensible, small set of roles. Modern society offers millions of options, and that itself is a new kind of challenge we have no evolutionary preparation for. But we definitely lost some things that mattered. We lost the ritual. There's no clear moment when a child becomes an adult. 18 is a legal line, but not a social or psychological one. We lost communal accompaniment. Families navigate their teenagers' transition almost entirely alone. There's no village to receive the new adult into the community. We lost real responsibility. Teenagers spend years in the simulated environment of school with no real tasks and no real consequences. What did we gain? Time, opportunity, education, protection from the actual threats of the Pleistocene. But the cost is a prolonged transition that for many people stretches a decade or more. And the second question for you. If you could design a ritual, a clear event after which everyone around you would recognize you as an adult, what would it be? What could have been your rite of passage? Leave it in the comments. Because the answer to that question says a lot about what was missing for you, or what you ended up finding on your own. Let's cover a few more things that rarely get talked about. Fourth, the role of pain in initiation. Many modern people are shocked to learn that traditional initiations often involved physical ordeals. Pain, fasting, isolation, sleep deprivation. Anthropologists document this everywhere, among the Aranda in Australia, the Ona in Tierra del Fuego, peoples of the Amazon, Arctic hunters. It's not cruelty, it's neurobiology. The brain encodes memories differently depending on the emotional and physical state during the experience. Intense experiences, especially the combination of fear, pain, and subsequent relief, create memories that last a lifetime. The moment of transition needed to be unforgettable, and it was.
Beyond that, going through an ordeal together creates a unique bond. That brotherhood or sisterhood supports a person for the rest of their life. Neuroscience confirms shared stress strengthens social attachment. Fifth, gender differences in initiation. Male and female initiations are typically structured differently.
Female initiation is more often tied to a biological event, first menstruation, often shorter and less physically painful, but socially no less significant. After the ritual, the young woman was received into the world of adult women with corresponding status and responsibilities. Male initiation often isn't tied to a specific biological event, and so requires more pronounced social marking. Puberty in boys is less externally obvious than in girls. The transition has to be created deliberately, through ordeal, ritual, a clear before and after. Alice Schlegel and Herbert Berry published a cross-cultural analysis in the journal Ethnology in 1979. Their finding? Male initiations more commonly have a group character. This fits the evolutionary logic. Effectiveness in hunting and combat depends on cooperating with non-kin, and group initiation builds exactly that bond. Boys' initiation was collective because they were going to hunt and fight together. Sixth, what happened after initiation? After the rite of passage, the young adult didn't face their new status alone. They were integrated into a mentorship system. In most hunter-gatherer peoples, young adults worked in close contact with experienced hunters or gatherers. Not formal education, shared activity in which knowledge was transmitted through observation, practice, and gradually increasing responsibility. Not abstract knowledge in a classroom, concrete skills in real conditions under experienced mentorship. Neuroscience supports this. The brain retains information better in the context of real action with real consequences than in a simulated environment. In summary, prehistoric societies had no theory of education, but they had something more important, a system that worked, a system that understood, without neuroscientific language, that adolescence requires a specific approach.
Not control, not endurance. A structured transition with clear markers, real tasks, and community support. We lost that system. We replaced it with school, which solves some things, but not the main one. It doesn't answer the question, when did you become an adult? And maybe that's why so many people feel like they're not quite adults yet, at 30, 40, 50. Not because they're underdeveloped, but because nobody ran the ritual for them.